To mark my 90th birthday, I'm taking a trip down memory lane. OK, what am I watching now? Shock me. I'm ready.
So will you bear with me? Think of that as being frying for about 5 minutes.
Celebrating a lifetime of doing what I love is a real honour. I think they look perfect. Joined by wonderful old friends. Cheers. No. Oh!
Come on, Berry.
And special new ones.
Delicious.
I've never had a dame in the house before.
Hello, sailor.
We'll cook some of my classics.
You're such a great teacher.
Wow. I've never been this scared since I did my exams for horticulture.
Update old favourites. Chickpeas. What were chickpeas in the early part of when I was cooking? And, of course, share some delicious new recipes.
Where on earth would I rather be right now?
Oh no. Oh. Dribbled the custard now.
No, it's all right.
You mean to tell me I did this?
You did that, rejoicing in my ongoing passion for home cooking.
You're such an inspiration.
Since I was very little, I've loved the outdoors. So it's not surprising the dear friend I'm visiting is one of the country's gardening experts, the brilliant Alan Titchmarsh.
What a treat. Mary Berry coming to my garden.
We're going to share dishes inspired by what we grow in the garden. I've enjoyed soup since I was a child, but this one is reinvented for the 2020s. Tuna and salads have been on my summer menu for decades, but this is my brand new way to make one. A classic I've been making for yonks, the delicious marriage of pasta, salmon and asparagus. And a salad centred on a cheese that has recently shot to fame, creamy, delectable burrata. Finally, my all-time favourite, apple cake, straight from the orchard. I can't wait to see my dear friend Alan again. There's absolutely nothing he doesn't know about gardening. And the garden, well, it's glorious. I could move in tomorrow. I'm so lucky that Alan's invited me to spend the day with him in his incredible 4-acre garden. He's dedicated 20 years to creating this magical space, and I'm getting the chance to explore it.
Good morning. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see. The garden is looking better than ever.
Can you remember when we first met?
Well, it must have been with gardening.
It was ages and ages ago, but the common bond, you like gardening and I like eating.
Yes, Alan, but I know you never cook. Thankfully, your lovely wife, Alison, is a whiz in the kitchen.
So Ali and I have been married 50 years this year. I bought her this when we got married and wrote, and this is the Hamlin All-Colour Cookbook by Mary Berry. What one I wrote in front?
With love and optimism, Alan. You always were a bit cheeky.
This was about the first cookbook that we ever had that showed what you were going to produce, the recipes underneath, and there was a picture of it at the top.
Exactly.
Well, it was revelatory in the early 70s, was that?
It was chilled lemon flan. Oh, yes, and coffee ice cream.
Yeah.
And that ginger biscuit roll. Good gracious. Oh.
Do you still make these, or are these just sort of old-fashioned recipes?
No,
now?
they're not. Do you know they
still
come
work.
back again? And what could be better than a traditional English trifle?
I love trifle.
It looks well used and a bit sticky, which I like to see.
And, oh, there is a photo in here talking of... Ta-da!
Oh, gosh. That takes me back, yes. It's the one that my husband has on his dressing table.
Is it really? Oh, how sweet.
I'm excited because in this wonderful Aladdin's cave of a garden, I know Alan's going to have incredible things to cook with. Lovely, and neat rows. I can see you're very orderly.
Look at this, I got my proper asparagus knife too. You see the weeds?
You have to hand weed those, don't you?
You do, because if I run through this with a hoe, I'm in danger of chopping off the asparagus. If I just get some of the most promising ones, nice fat stalks.
That'll be plenty. Right, off we go.
OK, I'm now in your hands. This is where I'm out of my comfort zone and into yours.
Don't worry. We're going to use that veg in my classic salmon and asparagus pasta. I've been making it for 30 years and it's never gone out of style.
So now we're getting down to the proper cooking.
We're starting by boiling the spaghetti in salted water, then turning our attention to the sauce, smoked salmon, creme fraiche, seasoning, and some fragrant dill and chives.
Oh, I can see you've done a bit of chopping in your time.
Alan wouldn't call himself a cook, but he's trying.
Don't expect me to look up because I'm concentrating.
Mind your fingers. I'm not going to be responsible for those.
I've never been this scared since I did my exams for horticulture, and I knew more about them.
Well, I'll give you marks.
Well, he's not doing a bad job.
Now, Alison's not with us right at this moment. What would she think of you doing this?
She said, oh, you can do it then, can you? Right, OK, from now on.
But you keep that knife away from me. I don't trust you.
The dill and chives go into the mix.
And it's sort of waste not, want not.
Yes,
So
OK, I can take the hint.
There we are.
Oh, the smell of Alan's freshly grown herbs. Just wonderful.
It gives you a sense of satisfaction, doesn't it? You feel you have contributed, even though my culinary skills might not be quite up to yours, Mary.
Well.
At least my horticultural skills are playing a part in this as well.
They're doing very well.
To complete the sauce, fry off banana shallots, chop fresh chilli, and sliced button mushrooms.
Now, that's bubbling away just what we want it to.
Time for the star of the show, the asparagus.
All my own work.
That's grown a bit too tall because you weren't out there picking.
I was
them.
leaving it because Mary Berry was coming to cook.
Now, just a
That's
moment.
why it got so tall.
Well, this part here is going to be tough.
Yes.
So you just wait where it breaks, and that we will use. So do that with all those.
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. Alan's on it. Time to check the mushroom and chilli.
Now you can see that it's just catching a little bit of brown on the outside. This looks perfect.
Smells good. Gosh,
Doesn't it?
smells
Look.
good.
When the spaghetti is nearly ready, throw in the asparagus to cook with the pasta.
Another job for you. Can you cut that in half and give me some juice back? That one is for our gin and tonic later.
Oh, goody.
Can you just go and drain it?
I'll go and drain it, OK.
And make sure you don't let the spaghetti down the sink.
Yes,
Into a colander, there's one waiting
yes,
for you.
OK, thank you.
Decades of friendship allows me to be a little firm, don't you think? Pasta rinsed under cold water, and we're ready to bring everything together. The salmon mix, a dollop of horseradish, and the lemon go into the mushrooms.
That's it. Give that a good stir.
I just begin to salivate here.
It's good, isn't it?
It is good.
And look at all those fresh herbs, all straight from your garden. It couldn't be fresher.
This is a sort of hot spaghetti carbonara, isn't it, really? Only not
It's no more
it hasn't got-
carbonara than you are.
Salmon, creme fraiche, and asparagus. Classic.
Doesn't that look good?
It looks incredible. It looks much better for me than spaghetti carbonara.
But how does it taste?
Come on, tell me.
Please don't make me talk. That's one of the best spaghetti dishes I have ever had. I'm not flattering you. It's gorgeous. But I'm going straight inside now to write it down so I don't forget which bit and which.
I've given you a written recipe, no excuses.
Those wonderful asparagus. Back in the 1980s, the country was still using pretty basic veg, though.
Now how about making a good soup? And I've got a turnip, and you can put potato if you like, some sliced onion. Then I'm going to have a leek. And
I'm
just cut.
really in my comfort zone because I persuaded the producers, please could I cook in my own home kitchen?
This was the very first show that I hosted on my own. A big step for me.
I've got a nice big pan. I'm going to make 4 pints of soup, making it really well worthwhile.
Very often the vegetables would come from the garden, depending on the time of year.
Now what remains is to add a bouquet garni.
People weren't used to having a bouquet garni, a little bunch of herbs tied together.
And what haven't I done? I haven't put the beans in. Let's add those now. In go the beans, haricot beans, and a little pearl barley.
I've always made vegetable soup, but now there's such a huge choice of vegetables in all the different seasons. I can add more variety.
That's fine.
So I'm reinventing my 1980s vegetable soup with a new favourite, cauliflower. Rich and creamy with a hint of nutmeg and mustard.
Who would have thought all those years ago that you would have cauliflower steaks? Often I'll take slices of the cauliflower and have those as the steaks, and all the little bits, I'll make a bit of soup. In goes the butter. In the past, I would have used dripping or perhaps some fat from chicken stock, just like my mother would use. That's just melting, and then I'm going to add onions.
Throw them in and let them soften.
In goes the cauliflower. Looks a lot, but it's going to have a really good flavour. Bit of stalk goes in, that's fine. Then the stock.
Let it simmer for 20 minutes, season, then blend till smooth.
Paul, my husband, he really likes soup with lots of bits in. I prefer a rich, smooth soup like this one with plenty of cream in as well. It is one of the few times that we differ. As I'm the cook, I slip in a puree from time to time. That's beautifully smooth. Now to the other seasonings.
Double cream is something I've always used in my soups.
I know Mum would put in the top of the milk, because in those days there would be a top of the milk, and she used to save that to have with crumbles and pies and perhaps to enrich a soup.
A kick of Dijon mustard, and I still use nutmeg for a warm, nutty flavour.
Nutmeg was an essential part of Mum's cupboard of spices, and there weren't many. That is looking rich and velvety. Just look at it. Much more creamy looking and lighter in colour.
I haven't used a bouquet garni for this soup. I'm simply adding fresh chives at the end.
Herbs are an essential part of my cooking. I grow all sorts of herbs. In the spring, I put them just by the back door. It's just lovely to go out and have your own herbs and chop them when you want them. That's it. In go the fresh chives.
One last stir, and it's ready to taste.
That's just rich and glorious. So good.
I'm proud of the herbs that I grow, but that's small fry compared to the wonders of Alan's garden.
I've got salad leaves I can give you, various herbs.
Right, salad leaves first.
OK.
Perfect, because my next recipe is a wonderfully fresh, modern salad.
This is round-leaved rocket, so I don't
Is
know.
it?
Yeah.
I thought it was baby spinach.
No.
Well, nothing could be fresher than this, and we know exactly where it's come from.
Because it's raised up, the birds don't seem to come up here, and neither do quite a lot of the pests. It's just raised out of the way.
When I started out, salads were tomatoes and cucumbers, or maybe a coleslaw.
Here we are.
Now I make this modern beauty. Using roasted pine nuts, pesto, and a cheese that shot to fame in recent years, burrata. But I'm starting with a very familiar veg.
They're French beans.
Yeah.
Can you take the...
Top and tail.
Yeah, I leave the tails on.
Oh, do you?
What's wrong with the tails? So I've got some boiling salted water here. Just drop them in there.
OK.
And I do those, you know, for roughly a minute or so.
Do you remember when we'd meet up at Chatsworth and I'd have been doing a gardening talk and you were in the kitchen cooking? You'd say, come and do a session with me and you can be my sous chef. You know, I did enjoy those. I was scared.
That was at the wonderful country fair that
Yeah.
they have every year.
Yeah.
It was good fun, but the audience just loved it when you made mistakes.
And there were a few
but
of them.
You needn't do that today.
No, OK, right.
The beans and added peas should be ready.
They want to have kept their colour, and also they want to have crunch.
We're much better about vegetables nowadays, aren't we? Not overcooking them rather than being boiled to death, you know. Generally speaking, up north, back in the 1950s, you put your sprouts on at the end of November.
And school, but that all went back to school dinners,
Yes!
don't you remember?
Cabbages, which a friend of mine used to call green Macintosh.
I think we can let the horror of overboiled British veg stay in the past.
Let's assemble the whole thing.
Right. So a bed of leaves first.
That's right.
Yeah, right. Lamb's
Yes,
lettuce.
with some lamb's lettuce.
Yeah.
All green, which is lovely.
Each of these mixed leaves, they all taste slightly different.
And then we arrange some of the beans and peas.
And now for my new favourite ingredient.
We've got some burrata here. Do you like burrata?
I do, love it, yeah.
It's solid mozzarella on the outside with a soft, creamy centre.
Yeah, it looks like a wonky boiled egg, doesn't it, really? Yeah.
And another popular addition of the last few decades, golden toasted pine nuts.
It's so easy to burn them. That's why I didn't let you do it, because I thought there'd be trouble.
How very wise.
And a final touch of some sliced avocado and season.
Just before serving,
Yes.
if you just pull that apart and
Right,
put some
break
pieces.
it open. Okay.
That's it.
Right. Oh, look at it. Oh, it's all wonderfully gooey inside.
Oh, lovely.
Look at that. Gorgeous, isn't it?
The dressing is a delicious mix of pesto with white wine vinegar.
Oh, that's so good with that sauce on. Symphony in green and white.
I love updating my old classics, but even after all these years, I still find so much joy in creating brand new ones like this.
You can prepare the vegetables and sauce in advance if you like, but cook the tuna last minute and serve it. Couldn't be better. You'd even get away with doing it on the barbecue on a sunny day.
The tuna is going to be glazed in a teriyaki sauce, soy, honey, white wine vinegar.
Toasted sesame oil, well, that's only been added to my cupboard in recent years, and I do use it. It has a very good flavour and quite different. One and a dash more. That's it. And then the juice of half a lemon.
Corn flour, grated garlic, and then whisk on a low heat until it's thick and glossy.
And now to the salad. I love cooking with things that I grow, and I grow cucumbers. They're really very easy. And I had 74 cucumbers last year, and I find all different ways of using them. Make a very good cucumber pickle.
Carrot ribbons add a beautiful colour and crunch.
I wonder whether Aaron grows carrots. There's nothing like a homegrown carrot. They taste so good. It's with no effort, and it does look rather good, especially when they're curled over. It'll be very good in the salad.
Peppery rocket into the bowl, then red pepper,
Some spring onions and cucumber, and our wonderful curls here of carrot.
salad ready. It's time to focus on those beautiful tuna steaks.
I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil to start with.
Then spoon over that delicious sticky sweet teriyaki sauce.
Remember, anything with honey in helps the fish or the meat to go brown quickly.
Make sure the pan is piping hot.
Pepper and salt.
We only want to sear it for 30 seconds until it's brown on one side.
Let's have a look and see how it's doing. You can just see from the side, the heat is just entering the tuna, looking good, ready to turn over. You've really got to watch this, not the time to think, oh, I need to go and water something in the garden. Stay with it. That's absolutely perfect.
Now to plate it all up. That wonderfully crisp salad balances with the teriyaki tuna perfectly. An ideal supper for a summer's day.
The tuna just melts in the mouth. It is absolutely scrumptious and goes so well with that crispy salad.
But it's not all about the vegetables. I am with one of the country's greatest gardeners after all.
Lovely.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
like a theatre.
I thought I needed to give you a pelargonium to remember this by, so I thought, what pelargonium can I give you? And I thought, I know. Mary looks wonderful in pink. So I've got a wonderful, rich pink pelargonium to give you. There we go. That's very Mary Berry pink, that.
Well, it's absolutely lovely, very elegant and tall and healthy, as I would expect it to be. And I think I might be able to take some cuttings.
Oh, you will. You'll have
a bit
more
later.
now. Yeah.
What a treat. I'm going to show Alan something he's never seen before as a thank you.
Right, let's see what you suggest for a family then in a picnic, Mary.
Well, sandwiches, Judy. This one says Thomas and William, no mustard.
Thomas and William, no mustard.
Exactly, that was a ham sandwich. You know, you learn what your children will like.
And so you can do it a week ahead, so you can have various fillings. And I've got some rolls here that have got layered fillings in. The chicken legs, I always put a piece of foil at the end so that you don't get your hands all sticky.
Ever practical.
Ever practical, and also the children eat much more when they can walk around. They just like the informality of it.
I've made some mousses, just ones made from evaporated milk, but the children just love them. Love them.
Evaporated milk.
And condensed milk. We used it so often.
Oh, yes.
Iced Spanish soup, that's what we did on the last programme together, Judy.
Gazpacho.
Gazpacho, and it's ideal for a picnic because you can have it icy cold, and you'll notice the ice is coming out as well.
Gazpacho would have been quite exotic in the 70s, wouldn't it, really?
It was perfect because people have been travelling, you know, to Spain and had it there, and you come home and make it.
Well, you needn't think any of this is going to be wasted. It's been promised to the crew for a long, long time.
Yes, now that's something that pertains still today. If you leave food out and there's a film crew present, it will go.
Absolutely.
And then for sticky faces, always remember to take a cloth.
Absolutely.
That is not an ordinary bag. You went into that bag up to your shoulder. This is Mary Poppins' bag, isn't it?
Well, it doubles up as a beach bag.
We filmed that picnic on a small patch near the motorway, a world away from this garden.
It is totally peaceful, sometimes disturbed by...
Even a world-renowned gardener needs tips sometimes.
Straighten up, a bit more that way. That's perfect. Lovely line.
What about a cup of tea?
I've got something a little better. This is one of my all-time classics.
Well, do you ever get a glut of apples?
Yeah, too many to use. Yeah.
Well, this is a perfect recipe for using up apples at the end, but you can make it all the year round if you've got apples. It's one of my favourites, and I honestly have been making it for years. And I just love it, and it's all the better for a nice dollop of cream on top.
Oh.
Core and peel some cooking apples, like these Bramleys.
When did you last make a cake then, Helen?
I don't think I have ever made a cake. I had a mum who made lovely cakes, a mother-in-law who made lovely cakes, a wife who makes lovely cakes.
And your daughters make good cakes.
Yes, they do. Big knife to core, this, isn't it?
Are you complaining?
No, just remarking.
Just remarking, that's right.
Just a comment. I complain.
You're doing them very neatly, considering you don't
pieces.
do them all the time. That's good.
All right.
For his first ever sponge, Alan needs 2 eggs.
Preferably without shell. You've done that before, that's because you do breakfast. There's no need to show off by doing it so high.
Oh, they dropped that one then.
Perfect.
True.
That's absolutely perfect.
Self-raising flour and baking powder makes a light sponge.
And one thing about this, it will dip in the middle. It's because, as you know, when you cook an apple,
yeah.
it becomes soft and it goes
It
down
will dip.
if it's done. So then we have the sugar.
Add almond extract for its fragrance and melted butter before whisking.
That way.
Yeah.
Oh, so far so good. Oh, gosh. It looks quite lumpy.
That's all right.
Is that right? I don't know what to expect. I don't know.
It will come a little bit smoother, but that's part of its charm. But you will see that it will come smooth.
I think that's the perfect consistency now.
Whenever I cook, if I give you a call, will you come and stand by me and say, it's all right, Alan, it'll be fine?
And then to stop it, you push it up. No, don't touch that. That one up that way. That's it. Sorry, wrong way. Press that one and...
It went faster then. You told me to do that.
Press that
Press
down,
that one.
and there we are.
Use half the mixture to form the base of the cake.
Spread it out.
Spread it out.
And then add the apples.
Arrange the apple round,
Yeah.
and don't put it to the side of the tin because it'll stick.
Gotcha.
So just put
Yeah.
it round in a sort of informal pattern. Right, now the rest of this goes on top. Now, just a tip.
Yeah.
We've got some camera people here.
Yeah, oh,
and
do it. I know.
You do it
You'd
towards
think I'd
the-
work with camera before. Do it towards the camera, yes.
That's right.
Now, gentlemen, here we are. This is...
Get it so it goes
let
round.
it sort of slop itself down.
So that's a lovely sweet sponge.
Oh, the almond essence.
And a final touch, delicious flaked almonds, then an hour and a half in a 140-fan oven, and I can take one more stroll around this magical garden. What a joy.
In the war, we grew in order to have food. We had so many vegetables because the meat was on ration.
Eat your veg.
Eat your veg.
But you like growing it too. I mean, it's left you with that legacy of it, hasn't it, really? Do you find when you come home, is the garden a great switch off from cooking?
I think the first thing I do is open the door, let the dogs out, and then you out there in the fresh air and you look up at the sky and all the worries go. And I would hate not to have the great outdoors.
I've got a rowing boat. I can take you once around the lily pads if you want.
I trust you as a gardener, but I'm not so sure about on the water. I think I'm better on my 2 feet on the grass.
I'll have you know I'm a qualified day skipper.
And this wonderful classic apple cake is ready.
It is the first cake I have ever made. Isn't it shameful to get to my age and never having baked a cake? I've grown a few apples that I could have put in it, though.
Served warm with cream, it's absolutely timeless. For a first effort, I certainly can't fault it.
It's deliciously moist. It's wonderfully subtly almondy. Oh, I'm a Yorkshireman who likes fruit cake and cheese, right? I like this every bit as much, I can honestly say that.
I don't think it'll be very good with cheese.
No, it's very nice with cream, though.
Well, Alan, I couldn't have had a happier day in your simply gorgeous garden.
Well, I couldn't have had a better day because I've baked my first cake. I found a recipe for a spaghetti, which is absolutely delicious, and carbonara is now in the shade for me. And I can cook that for us and just, oh, there's a little recipe I'm going to rustle up tonight and top it with apple cake. I mean, thank you very much. And when people say to me, who taught you to cook? Mary Berry.
Next time,
These last two don't want to go in. Come on, lads.
my lifelong love of entertaining.
Just look at that then. Wouldn't you be proud if you'd made that?